I'm absolutely delighted to be welcoming Patricia Yates, Director of Strategy and Communications at Visit Britain. Patricia is going to give us a short presentation about Visit Britain and what they're hoping to do in the current situation. Patricia, over to you.
Thank you, Tom. So let me just run through the impact of COVID in the UK and what the response has been and what we think the impact of it will be. So tourism, really important industry, third largest service export. I think what government has realised during the crisis is it's a huge job creator. So over 3 million jobs are in the tourism sector, and those jobs, of course, are right across the UK. So this is an industry that creates jobs in our cities, but in our countryside and in our coastal resorts as well. So our focus has to be that ensuring that tourism rebounds to become once again one of the most successful sectors of the UK economy, because tourism was the first hit and the hardest hit. And we saw businesses, and as I'm sure I don't have to tell you, with cash flow just drying up when we went into lockdown. And it's also been one of the last sectors to be able to reopen. So England is broadly open, not business visits and events, I have to say. Scotland is about to open in July. Wales now has some dates for not only outdoors but inbounds being able to open in August. And what does the impact of this mean? Well, it means that our inbound tourism spending, we were forecasting about £30 billion a year. We're looking at a £20 billion loss. And domestic tourism in England dropping by about 48%, so losing about 37 billion. So these are big numbers. This is a big loss to the British economy. One of the issues we're working with at the moment is how do you get people confident about going out and spending money? And I think this is probably an area where Brits have been a bit different from Europeans, we see, because we see a lot more confidence in European markets than in Britain, where people obeyed the lockdown, I think, against government expectations, and now really need tempting to come out, and some of them spending the money that they've been saving during lockdown. And you can see that's really been where the government has going, but still uncertainty. So we've been doing a weekly domestic tracker, and we've seen that the belief that this is the worst is yet to come, and that we won't be better by Christmas, has increased week upon week in the general population. And now more than half of the general population feel that. And we've seen some slight increase in people starting to feel confident about taking a domestic holiday. But you can see it's still only around 31% in August. So really small increases. And what's been driving that lack of confidence? Well, public transport has been quite a worry in this country. And then, of course, concerns about catching COVID, and actually that a lot of the sector is still not open. What are people saying they want? No surprises, rural, seaside, travelling in their own cars, so an appreciation of self-catering and camping. And I think what we've seen here, which was different in China, so businesses looked at China, thought that business travel would drive the recovery, and it isn't the case at all. It's leisure travel driving the recovery. We've looked at that worrying lack of confidence and thought, how do we provide a sort of ring of confidence to get businesses knowing that they understand what the government guidelines are and can show that, and consumers seeing a mark that means that they can be confident that they're using businesses. And we've worked across all sectors and right across the UK, so that this is unusually, this is a system that's working right across the UK, in Ireland, in Wales, and Scotland, and in England. And you can see that little green signal, that little green tick down at the bottom. It's we're good to go. I think where our work has changed is unusually for a crisis. This is a crisis where we've seen collapse of supply as well as demand. If you think about other things that we've worked on, you know, volcanic ash and foot and mouth, the question was, how could you build demand? How could you get people back traveling? This time, it's how can you get business up and opening again, as well as how do you build demand? And the view was that this was a recovery that would be led by the domestic market. And so the first campaigns we've kicked off have been for the domestic market. So a Know Before You Go campaign, that's really helping people know what's open, what they can do, what the guidelines are. The government has kicked off a huge cross-sector campaign running through July and August, spending big money on this. Enjoy Summer Safely campaign. There are television ads around it and a big media buy supporting that. The first couple of weeks were very much focused on tourism. And you can see the government has done some really surprising things to protect tourism a little. So, you know, 1.4 million hospitality workers have been furloughed. That's the highest proportion of any sector. And in the coming into recovery, we've seen a major cut to that, something the tourism industry has been campaigning on for a long time, but cut from 20% to 5% until January 2021. And then Eat Out to Help Out campaign, where you get half your money back if you eat out on Monday, Tuesday and Wednesday, up to a value of £10. So government really trying to boost hospitality. Inbound, well, we always took the view that inbound would come after you'd stimulated the domestic market. And really, it's a good job we thought that, isn't it? Because we've had the quarantine imposed through June. We're now starting to see quite a long list of countries that can travel freely to the UK, a lot of European countries on there. And we're looking at how we work in Europe with big partners to really start stimulating demand, because I think the realistic view is America is still on that quarantine list, as is Canada. We don't think that China will be coming back anytime soon this year. Gulf still a lot of uncertainty in that region. India fighting its own issues with COVID. So where are we going to get people to come in the autumn, to come quickly? It's going to be the European market. And it is essential that we get the European market back. If you look at our city centres, if you look at our major attractions, yes, the domestic market might get you to open your doors, but really many of those businesses absolutely depend on the international visitors. And you can see, you know, Roman baths, 90% international. The big galleries, hugely proportion of international visitors. And if you look at the city centre hotels, those big hotels, they also need the international visitors to come. And many of them are talking now about they perhaps won't open in August. And that's a worry for giving that flavour of what the city offer is. So really important that we get people travelling and we get those businesses feeling confident about opening. And you can see that July bookings down 96%, August down 88%. And talking to carriers, they're still talking about, you know, soft July, slightly better August. Dire, I think, was the word used after that, and a real worry about the level of no-shows, which is a running issue today. But one of the carriers told me they were seeing 40% of no-shows, even though they'd reimposed some cancellation charges. So again, that confidence to get people onto the plane. We're working with the international travel trade and with our people in markets to really drive European visitors, to work on social media, but also to get a campaign that's ready to go once we finish the sort of peak summer, so that we're out in market very quickly. So our priorities, we in fact restructured ourselves as an organisation to make sure that we were looking at the most important things. The first, of course, our staff welfare. We're all working at home. and looking after our teams globally, because of course our China team has been working at home since February. So looking at how we really support those teams. Advising government, we have a statutory role to advise government and to make sure they understand the impact of policy on industry, and to help into advocate some of the policy and interventions that are really needed to rebuild the industry. To support industry, to be honest, we're set up to stimulate demand. We're not really set up or funded to do the supporting industry. And that has been so important. And I think it's something we need to think about our role in the future. So helping businesses come through this, helping them rebuild, and then ensuring that international buyers are ready to sell Britain. The recovery planning campaigns, as I was talking about, and then keeping the business going, really fundamental stuff. Our IT team have been working on overdrive. And so focusing on those key priorities, making sure we're getting the advice for government, the data that government needs, but we're building our marketing campaigns and ready to go in domestic and international markets. I'll skim through that and just show you some of the stuff we're doing. So we're not looking at major spend in international markets at the moment. So most of the stuff we're doing is sort of social media, using our own channels, and working through media to tell the story of Britain and to really keep alive the dream of being able to come to Britain this year. So thank you. That's my presentation done.
Patricia, thank you very much for that. I think it's quite clear that Visit Britain, along with every other company at the moment, has found that there being no business involves far more work than normal business. It looks like you've been very, very busy indeed. Do you think, I mean, the situation, let's not beat about the bush, the situation is uniquely desperate. I mean, we've got if we're looking at the inbound market for the UK, I think a 63% decrease that you're projecting there is really quite optimistic, and is factoring in a reasonably substantial return to confidence in the final quarter of the year. And whilst 2 or 3 months ago, people were talking up the last quarter of the year, I think the decision not to include the United States on the list of permitted countries has unfortunately killed most of the September and October business that people had. So, I mean, we're really looking at 2021 is the answer. And what indications are there for a recovery in 2021?
Well, it's interesting you pick up America, because before we thought there were going to be quarantines, I would have probably said, and certainly our American regional director would have said, go America first, because you know, if you get the carriers involved, that's where the carriers make their money. So they have an interest in getting transatlantic off, and all our feedback from the market is the American tour operators are ready to go. They have a lot of people who have booked and have taken credit notes, so have transferred their holidays through to next year, who need to decide where to go. They're not necessarily wedded at coming to Britain. They could go anywhere. So the view was there was a lot of money tied up there, and we needed to be in that market and promoting. But alas, not on the list of non-quarantine countries. So I think the realism is that you have to go for Europe, and if you look at the signs for Europe, they are much stronger than we're seeing from British domestic. In that, you know, we've been speaking to people like Google and Expedia about people looking and people booking, and we can see, for example, the German market is really active. Intra-European travel is coming back much stronger, and so we need to be in there and pitching, and then to be helpful, obviously the government has started talking about Brexit just at the time when we're thinking we need to go big in Europe. So even the market that should be the easiest sell does not look like an easy market at the moment. And then next year, will the Chinese start to travel again? I would hope so. and will we get, the Arab market coming back into London, reverting to its normal pattern of travel? There are a lot of people that are hoping that as well. But I think not to underestimate the challenges we have uniquely as being Britain, but also the challenges every tourist board has, and that every destination is out there competing to get that recovery and sees the same figures about a slow recovery, probably taking 18 months to 2 years even. So we are going to have to claw our way back to the levels of growth that we took for granted almost this time last year.
No, and I think you're quite right to stress that, because it seems a distant memory, but everyone was anticipating a record year for 2020.
Yeah.
I think every single one of my members, looking at North America, looking at China, looking at Japan, were anticipating growth of minimum of 10%. And last year was a very good year, so we're looking forward to an excellent year on top of an excellent year. And the reversal has been so dramatic that the fact that optimism was last year's symptom or last year's experience, the reality is so savage. It's difficult to find words for it. I note that you were saying in your presentation that it's Visit Britain's responsibility to nurture demand, not to support business, and I think that's a difficult point. Well made. Can I point out?
Well, I would say that's how we're structured and funded. I mean, that's the interesting thing. We're structured and funding to do international marketing, and we're in 20 international markets with money spent extremely thin. But that's really the focus. And Visit England, which is sort of supply side, gets a really small budget. And sort of Treasury does not really believe in domestic marketing, because they've always taken the view, well, if they don't spend it in a hotel, they're going to spend it in B&Q, and I don't support, I don't put money into B&Q as the Treasury, so why should I put it into the hospitality industry? I think, stroke hope, that that what this crisis has done has really to push home some of those messages we've been talking about for years to Treasury and to government about how many people are really employed in tourism, and how, if you're a government that's talking about levelling up, well, if you're looking at those northern seaside resorts, if you don't get tourism working, you can do what you like, the place isn't going to work. So the importance of tourism as a job creator, as it always has been in times of recession, but also how it delivers on that government agenda of sort of redistributing wealth and getting people out to explore this year. Should be the year that if Brits could be persuaded to travel, that we should see more of us doing that.
Well, I think you're right to stress this. I think that as intermediaries, my members sell destinations, and they sell destinations on the basis of the domestic service economy. And when we sell Paris, we sell the Paris that Parisians support. And people go to Paris to go to the restaurants, go to the shops, go to the museums that are created by local demand. And the same is true of Italy, the same is true of Spain. And the same is manifestly true of London. Even those areas which are overwhelmingly reliant on foreign visitors, and that includes the attractions and the shops, and to a certain extent the theatres and the restaurants. I mean, foreign visitors make up nearly 40% of all spend in London theatres. These people coming to these places go because of the product shaped by British demand. And I think the most important element in London is domestic demand, because that's what underpins the appeal of London, I think. I just worry that the combination of significantly reduced domestic demand and dramatically reduced foreign demand is going to threaten the viability of much of what we deal with. And I know, I was about to say, this is not your responsibility. Who should we go to with this plea?
Well, I think in part it is our responsibility, at least to advise government. I think it's that mix, isn't it, of the destination and if you look at London, I mean, there's a big debate, as you know, about should the office workers be back in London. And certainly when I went up on Friday to have my hair cut, it was very, very quiet. And I think, how do you get that vibrancy back that you just took for granted in London with all the cafes and the shops open and theatres, which are going to be a longer term ask, and you know, even the well-known restaurants, happened to go to one in the evening, wasn't opening till 5 o'clock, so it wasn't doing all the breakfasts and lunches it would normally do for the local markets that attracted international visitors as well. And I think we have a particular challenge on the city centres. If you look at that fairly cautious domestic, I mean, even more cautious about going back to work and using public transport. So that's hitting your city centres. You've got slow growth on business. So the business market isn't coming back. We haven't got a timeline for business events. And so it's not just London, it's the big city centres, Manchester and Birmingham. How do you stimulate demand there? And some of that could be by new audiences. I mean, if you look at who's going to save the summer, it's probably those resorts and countryside. It's probably the family audience, isn't it? That if you get them to holiday at home rather than holidaying abroad, they will go and they will spend the money. But the families and the older market, and the older market is the traditional bedrock of domestic travel. They're probably the most risk averse. So you're looking at that younger audience, may not spend as much ahead, but aren't so worried about the risk, and you might be able to get them to come back into the cities. But I think then you need to have the public transport right, whether it's London or Manchester or Birmingham, because you don't actually want people to drive in the city centres either, do you? So I think there's a lot of things that are working together that government needs to think about. Government tends to think in verticals, you know, one sector, and actually tourism is one of those industries that cuts right across. So how do you get that offer back that you can really be promoting London and the other cities strongly internationally? And it's a challenge, isn't it?
It is an enormous challenge. I think from the markets that we represent, there are sort of determinedly optimistic people that see business in the last quarter of the year, or the second half of the last quarter of the year. Most of the people we're talking to think that business will be there in 2021, but 2021 will be a bridge year for 2022. They think that there's all sorts of problems associated with airline lift. They think people will, you know, will take time to get back to being used to travel and be confident to travel. I'm not sure. I mean,
it's really uncharted territory, because normally, and I think at the start of this, we did the same. You talk about pent up demand, you know. Don't worry, if we use 3 months, you'll take the brakes off and everyone will come flooding back. It's not like that, is it? So I think this is a very different sort of crisis than we have traditionally dealt with.
I can't work out. I mean, you're almost talking about a sort of suburbanization of demand. You know, people are not going at the moment going into city centres. They're staying on the outskirts and visiting, you know, shopping centres and going to B&Q, as you said. If this becomes entrenched, we've got a real problem, because in broad terms, there are niche markets for everything. Foreign visitors don't come to visit suburban shopping centres; they come to see the big historic cities. I mean, it's
well, I mean, you can see government's given it a go, haven't it, with its cutting of VAT from 20% to 5%. Interesting whether that is passed on to the consumer or not. I know there is some discussion around businesses about that that was a grant for businesses to keep them going through the winter. I think it was the initial suggestion from government was to stimulate demand. And the eating out thing, to get, that probably is of more value to smaller pubs and cafes and restaurants, to get people eating out and get people used to traveling again. But I think, we're still waiting for the guidance to change on public transport, actually, and then the whole debate about mask wearing, where government doesn't really seem very sure what it's advising. Are we going to say that everyone should wear masks inside? I mean, I've got friends who are sort of Chinese and Malaysian, and they are astounded that we walk around the streets without masks on. It's just what people do. Whereas if I walk around here, I see very few people wearing masks nowadays. So are we going to go for that sort of change of behaviour? And will that make people feel more confident? Both British nationals, but also international as well.
Well, we just don't know. The good news is we don't know. We'll have to find out. Do you think there's anything in particular, just touching on levelling up is probably not the right word, but touching on the more regional elements of the UK, because we've looked at London, to a certain extent, the big cities. Do you see demand changing at all for destinations like Wales, Northern Ireland and Scotland?
I mean, I think there's been confusion, hasn't there, among British people, let alone foreign people, about the different pace at which the nations are going. So Wales is considerably slower than other nations, and so I think Wales business is ready to go, but still quite a slower timeline. You would certainly expect, and goodness, we're working hard to get the domestic market to get away from the honeypots and to explore more. From that sentiment research, we see everyone wants to go to Cornwall and the Lake District. So how do you get people to explore more of their own country and to get away from the crowds and get away from those honeypots, which are slightly heavy? So I think that's important to do, and extending the season. It might look all right in July and August, but what's it going to look like September, October? And given how many months we've lost of tourism, we really need to extend the season and get as much business as you can. And yes, you're absolutely right. I mean, in talks with the airlines, they're not seeing that pattern of bookings through to the autumn that gives them much confidence.
Well, I think I would just end with a thought that I think there's everything to play for 2021. As you said, there are all these credits there. I think 50%, at least 50% of the groups that were scheduled for 2020 have rebooked for next year. I think there are a lot of people who had plans this year outside the group market, had plans this year that were are determined to enjoy them next year, and to a certain extent, the thing you most crave after you've been subjected to a lockdown is a foreign holiday. I mean, it's the thing you just want to get out of there and get some change of scenery.
And in some positives, I was talking to Oxford, and they said if they can just get through this year, they think they'll be fine next year, because they can see Europeans are booking already for next year. So it's the next few months that they're worried about.
No, people who've got next year open and available are taking bookings for next year, and so we've got all the demand that was stalled from 20 moving into 21, and we've got all the latent demand that we would expect in 21. So there are grounds for optimism. It is contingent, I think, on things like vaccines being available, but and there being a product to sell, as you pointed out. Patricia, thank you so much for these words. This has been excellent. Is there anything more you want to say, by the way?
No, but I shall echo your optimism that I think we have to go out there and speak for the industry and fight for the industry and deliver as good a result as we can for the British tourism industry next year. And so, as you say, all to play for, and we'll certainly be out there playing for it.
Only in Britain, only in autumn 2020 and 2021. Okay, Patricia, thank you very much.
Thank you.